Coogs House. It is March. The tournament is out, and everyone is focused on Memphis and then Dallas and then Phoenix for the Final Four. But we do have to talk about that Iowa State game.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater who came to stop by, and in March there are plenty of those, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way, listen on the Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. Appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. And we found us on YouTube. Welcome back to the YouTube channel. It's so good to see you again. Giveaways every 500 subscribers. We're at about 2,100. Hit subscribe, helps get the like and comment on the video. Let us know you're in that contest to get something given away at that point. If you don't know what to say after talking about Iowa State game in this bonus episode of Locked On Cougs, tell us in the comments down below. Well, it is March. We should be counting down brackets and things like that. But March is also springtime, right? Tell us, at least in Texas, it's springtime. Tell us what signifies the spring to you. All right, in today's episode, I want to talk some about the Iowa State game. This is a bonus episode. If you're looking for March Madness, talking about the seeding, that is the full-length episode, also out right now. So with that said, I want to talk some about Iowa State game and not just completely gloss past it, although I do think there's something healthy about just glossing past it and flushing it. If you're living under a rock, Houston did play Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game. This episode, Breaking It Down, is brought to you by Nissan. More on that in a second. But Houston played Iowa State on the floor and on paper, but on the TV, it certainly looked like Houston played about half a basketball game. Houston lost 69-41. Just an ugly game from the start. And I do think at this point we know that it did not impact a whole lot of anything about Houston's seeding. And we know that, frankly, some people would say just flush it and move on, et cetera, et cetera. I had some thoughts during the game and wanted to kind of break down things that maybe you could worry about going forward, but also were very specific to Iowa State. And that may not be a problem until like Phoenix, right? Like it may not ever be a problem. But Houston, interestingly, had just one double-digit score. That was Jamal Shead, who had 10 points. Damian Dunn had 8 off the bench. I think there's a reason for that, and I'll tell you in a second. And they ran into Iowa State, which is interesting because I think of Iowa State, as far as their on-the-floor product, is a very carbon copy of the Houston Cougars. They're a little bit healthier and a little bit fresher. And then on the championship game, they went a little bit deeper into their bench. But they're both defensive, forceful, physical teams led by a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, National Defensive Player of the Year candidate at point guard. Both Jamal Shead and Tamin Lipsey are both on that short list. Jamal Shead won the Big 12 Player of the Year, Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. So see if Lipsey can win the national one. A very similar type of guys for sure. And frankly, on the third game in 3 days, Lipsey wore Jamal out, and it looked like Jamal had just led 2 impressive Cougar efforts over the previous 48 hours, right? I think it's very, very clear that 3 games in a row hurt the Cougars, and I think that it's for a number of reasons. When you talk about the injuries and the depth and the cards that have been dealt this season or whatever, playing 3 games in 3 days is really hard. And luckily, the NCAA tournament is a bunch of series of 2 games in 3 days, and so 3 games in 3 days. But I think the way it showed up on the court was actually not on the defensive side. I mean, Houston gave up 69 points. Now, admittedly, Iowa State kind of took their foot off the gas in the last couple minutes, but they were not pressing like defensive pressing like a jerk, whatever, but like they were putting foot on the pedal to the metal, whatever you want to say, for the majority of this basketball game. But when Houston played Iowa State the first time around and lost to them up in Ames, Iowa, they held them to 57. And that was a 4-point loss, really a 2-point loss, had to foul after the end, right? They played them in Houston and gave up 65 points. And then in this third time, they gave up 69 points. On the whole, assuming that the offenses are going to figure out a little bit more on how to attack you each time because of scouting and film and things like that, I actually don't know that the defense looked as horrifically tired as the offense did. Now, Iowa State did shoot the leather off the ball 50% from the field, 40.9% from three. And I would point out some of those first half threes were deep and contested, and it didn't seem to matter, right? So I don't mean to say and diminish anything Iowa State did offensively. They hit some crazy tough shots, but the impact of the wear and tear, the impact of the fatigue appeared to hit Houston's offense a whole heck of a lot more, where they shot just 26.8% and 18.2% from three. Only Jamal Shead hit multiple three-pointers. He was 2 of 9. 9. Right? Manuel Sharp 1 of 5, Elgin Cryer 1 of 4. No one else hit a three-point field goal for the Houston Cougars. And I think when you look at it, the interesting thing was not necessarily the jump shooting, although three-point, obviously that sticks out there. It was that Houston had trouble, and even Jamal had a little bit of trouble getting downhill. They were half a step slow turning the corner on screens, a half a step slow coming off of that 1-5 high screen with Francis or Lott or whoever, right? And that half a step slow clearly mattered when Iowa State was playing a little bit juiced, a little bit amped. They had a very home crowd feeling crowd, to say the very least. Folks at Iowa State travel well anyway. There are people talking about we need to move the tournament to blah, blah, blah. Like those folks will travel if you move it in Vegas, if you put it in Anchorage, if you put it in New York City. Iowa State's going to show up. I think it's on everyone else that conference show up as well, right? I'm not putting that on location. It was relatively close to Iowa State, but those folks will travel. Now, I think though that you saw that half step play out when guys couldn't get downhill, and you saw Jamal Shead in particular. I mentioned he was 2 of 9. He only made one other field goal in the game. He didn't have a whole lot of success around the rim. And I talk about basketball as a two explosion kind of sport. You explode laterally to get past your guy and vertically to get to the rim and can get it through contests at the rim and stuff like that. And it looked like Jamal was kind of missing that second explosion, right? What makes him so talented is he really has 3 explosions over the course of a basketball game. He looked like he was struggling to get one out in this one. I do think there's something to be said about the emotional letdown, though, when Jalen Roberts came out and played the first half. Houston only down 7 at halftime. And frankly, felt like I was fairly confident just right back in this, come out, make some shots second half, things go our way, blah, blah, blah. And he didn't play the second half. And I actually forget now off the top of my head if he actually started the second half or not, but he played just 13 minutes in the game. They're all in the first half, so I guess didn't start the second half. He that's the emotional spirit guy. I mean, everyone rallies around Jawan's toughness and so on. And it seemed like they pulled him because it was determined that, he probably needs to start getting ready and rested for the next games, right? Because there are more games for Houston with very serious consequences on them afterwards. Now, no one has said that, and I'm frankly sure, from a cultural perspective, I imagine the team will entirely deny that from here until forever. But it certainly looked that way, and it looked like once he was out, there was a shot on the television. If you're there in person, you probably missed it, but where Shed, Francis, Sharp, and Jaywan are all sitting on the bench. I must have been a timeout because I don't remember those 4 being out this early in the game. And they all just kind of looked like, okay, let's go home. Like, we lost this one. Like they were down at this point. It stretched from like 7 to 15 or 20. And I think they're just ready to get home, get healthy, get rested, and get on to the next game. And they said as much in the post game. You heard quotes about getting healthy, needing to get right, needing to get their legs back under them, etc. And in the March Madness episode, which you can go tune into as soon as this one's over, or if you're coming here from there, thank you for coming over. There is some truth to that, right? They really do need to go get healthy and get ready. But I don't think there's nothing else to be taken away from this game. Yes, they lost by, I guess it finished at 28 points. It was 30 points there for a second. I think it got to 32 at one point. But I do think there are weirdly some positives to take away. But first, we do need to talk some about our Cougs in comparison to other well-oiled machines. This week's March Madness bracket highlights brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out and that's pushed it further than the rest. Just like any of the 2024 Nissan SUVs, these guys are able to make it to the next level. Houston got to the Big 12 and won the conference regular season championship. I still got my shirt on. I'm still repping it, I promise. The Houston Cougars can only be described as an armada. The top-seeded team is as hardcore as it gets out there, so it's no wonder why they're expected to land a top seed in the tournament after their first season in the Big 12. You can take the Nissan Rogue, Pathfinder, or that Houston Cougar-themed Nissan Armada to go on your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. All right, positive takeaways from this one, because I do think it's worth pointing out that there should be some, right? Every game you find things to take and continue to build on and move forward. And if the J1 Roberts injury really is the kind of thing that will just heal with a few days and some rest and so on, and it's just the bruise contusion that hurts a lot in the moment, but with time will heal, that we've heard of, you kind of got out of the tournament relatively okay as far as your health goes, right? There was no major injuries, knock on wood, nothing too terribly crazy. I will put myself on the record if I'm not already. I think I am already. Another significant injury into the season, right? That if it's in the rotation, like as great as the season's been, 30 wins, Big 12 regular season champs, etc. Another big time injury is just too much for any team to overcome to your like core rotation of 8 or 9 guys, right? Even when your thing at the start of the season was depth. And assuming the J1 injury will be okay in a couple days, because it sounds like they're all saying it will be. And again, he played 13 minutes in the Iowa State game. I think you're all right there. Jamal and LJ Cryer both made the all conference tournament team. I do think that's good pub for the school and university. I do think that's good patting on the back for those two guys. There's also two guys with NBA aspirations, and those guys getting to the NBA would ultimately help out this program. I don't know if either one or both comes back. They have the COVID year if they want it. Maybe later we'll talk about who I would bet on coming back and who I wouldn't, but that's not for this episode. But all that does help the program in a bigger picture kind of standpoint. My real thing, though, I think that you can take from this game is we talk about it as the awful blowout that it was. But at halftime, with how poorly you were shooting the ball and how awful your offense was, you were down just 7 to one of the best teams in America in what was basically a road game. And I understand they were gassed, and I understand the second half got ugly. If it had mattered more than a conference championship tournament, I wonder if the outcome would be different. And I don't mean to say that Houston necessarily wins. I would say it's a crazy difficult matchup for everyone. But I do think that taking that first half and extrapolating it to even with that 7-8 minute stretch to open the second half being as bad as it was, do you find some ways to stop that earlier, curtail that earlier? You come in at halftime with a different mentality, etc. Again, you were down 7 points to a top 10 team, basically on the road, with your starters gassed and J1 playing with another injury. I think that's okay. I know that's very like qualitative and like finding silver linings or whatever, but I don't think that first half was all that bad. I said as much as Twitter and some Iowa State folks I will say Iowa State folks on Twitter are much nicer than other folks. I don't mean it's like super pejoratively. That Larry guy's weird though, but I will say that they honestly were like, yeah, I'm sure you thought that wasn't so bad then, and then the second half happened or whatever, right? But coming out of halftime, I was like, okay, make a couple baskets, get a couple stops, you're right back in this thing. What's the big deal? And then the exact opposite happened. 7 turned to 14, turned to 21 pretty quickly. I would say that a year ago in this American Athletic Conference tournament, remember, that lost Marcus to a groin injury, which was much more significant especially to the way he plays, then it sounds like the Jalen Roberts injury is, right? And that team made it to the Sweet 16, right? So a year ago's team was battered and bruised and had a shorter rotation to start with. And while they didn't have the season-ending injuries earlier in the year that this team has had, the week before the NCAA tournament was certainly much worse in terms of Jamal Shead's knees, Sasser's groin. A couple guys had backs and stuff like that. I mean, this team is weathered, but it is not necessarily in that shape, right? And that team got to the Sweet 16 as a 1 seed. As we'll talk about in the March Madness show on the other show, if you haven't been there yet, Houston also made it as a 1 seed now. And so I wonder if it's like, okay, we kind of get the drill here. We understand what we're doing, and we can keep it moving. And then last, but ultimately not least, is this team responds to loss well. I know Iowa State and TCU were back-to-back, but bear with me for a second because those are 2 losses in a week by a combined 5 points. Frankly, one was on a crazy difficult shot from Mosilovic from Iowa State. Then Houston missed shot and had to foul or whatever, right? But crazy shot from Mosilovic on the road in Ames. And then at TCU, he got beat backdoor and had a brain fart of sorts on the ensuing offensive possession. You take that they then win, half dozen games in a row after that in the Big 12. They go to Kansas, lose in Fall Gallon. Fall Gallon was the last loss. And Houston responded to that by reeling off 11 straight Big 12 victories, many of whom were on the road, right? Including beating that same Kansas team that beat them by a 30-piece, including beating that same Iowa State team by 8 points, right? Like, this team will take the film, take the things to learn from, get better from it. And they've shown that. They've shown that over Sampson's time on campus. They've shown that this season. They frankly have shown that from ugly wins this season. They get better by dissecting what happened. And out there, you showed a lot of your flaws. And I think it's worth pointing out that they don't have 11 games left, right? They won 11 straight after the last loss, and they only have to win 6 to be cutting down nets in Phoenix. Now, we'll be following the journey each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. Between here and wherever the season ends, we do hope it is ending with some nets being cut down in Phoenix. We'll be breaking all of those things down. So make sure you subscribe, like, and comments so we can get some feedback on the videos. And like always, Locked On Cougs is the proud member of Locked On Podcast Network. There's your team, our number one Cougs every day. Go Cougs.